welcome to the soft launch of Guess Who Never Left, a book on common invasive alien plants of Peninsular India. I am Aditi Sajwan, and I lead the public engagement function at the Biodiversity Collaborative. Thank you so much for joining in the celebration of one-of-a-kind book and truly a collaborative effort that cuts across organizations, individuals, and multiple talents. I very vividly remember the day we came up with this name, Guess Who Never Left, and decided to translate this effort into a campaign. And it's incredible how far we've come from, the day we started, and today we're launching a book. Before we begin, a few housekeeping announcements. Please keep yourself on mute unless you're speaking, and the audience can put their questions in the Q&A box, which we will curate towards the end and address. We'll also be recording the session. To mark this special occasion, we have a very exciting lineup of speakers who engage with this issue in their work. Following their presentations, we'll be sharing a free digital copy of the book with you. And post that, we'll be hearing from the authors and the makers of the book. So without much ado, I invite our first speaker, Alok Bang. So a little about Alok. Alok is an ecologist and currently an assistant professor at Azim Premji University. He has pursued basic scientific research in animal behavior and evolutionary biology. Alongside, he's also pursued applied research in conservation and biological invasions. Thank you so much for joining us today, Alok. It'll be great if you could help us understand biological invasions, especially when it comes to plant species we commonly see around us, but often know so little about. Over to you, Alok.
Thank you so much. Honor also to be part of this virtual event. Joy because I know some of you as my peers, and honor because I know some of you, some of the authors, as people who have kind of paved the way for the discipline of biological invasions in India. I think I had a chance to go through the book. I did not read the book, but I skimmed through it, and I really found it very, very special. I think it's scientifically very solid. There's evidence-based material in the book. And on the other hand, it's very aesthetically made, and that combination is quite rare. And I think the book scores very high on that regard. I think what the book does very, very well is that it kind of creates evidence for a discipline, the discipline of biological invasions, which is in its incipient stages in India, which is in its formative years. Although a lot of work has been going on, it has been going on in certain regions, on certain species. The synthesis aspect of research has only happened, I would say, in the last 2 decades or so. And in that sense, the book scores would add to the body of knowledge that we have for the discipline. Globally, the discipline of biological invasions has been kind of functional for 60 or 70 years or even more. In India, it's been catching up quite recently. The reason why I feel that the discipline has been neglected, the issue of invasive alien species has been neglected in India, is largely because of the awareness, but also maybe because of the socio-political system in which we live. Maybe we have space for only one environmental disaster at a time. And currently that seat has been very firmly taken by global warming and climate change. What this book really does very well is kind of bring to people's notice is that apart from global warming and climate change, there are other anthropogenic environmental disasters that are happening, like, for example, biological invasions. But biological invasions is not the only one. There's habitat degradation, there's pollution, and so on. Right. In India, the major problem regarding invasive species is that we have a data deficiency regarding knowledge and information on invasive species. This data deficiency is not uniform. It is ecosystem-centric, region-centric, species-centric, taxon-centric. But more or less, at the country level as well, we have very, very little information available on which species are new, which guests have never left, when did they arrive, what are their impacts, what are their socio and economic impacts and ecological impacts. We really know very less. But even the basic information as to which are the introduced species in India, we don't know much about it. Just to give you kind of a baseline about it, France, which is 1/6 or 1/7 the size of India, the global register for introduced and invasive species enlists 3,000 species which are introduced or invasive in France. India, which is 6 or 7 times larger, has only 2,100 species enlisted as introduced or invasive. So introduced species is the larger umbrella, and within that, if you know that this species has some negative ecological or economic impact, we classify them as invasive. So out of the 2,100 species classified as alien or introduced, only 280 species are currently listed as invasive. And that, I think, is a huge problem. We also have ecosystem and species-related problems. Terrestrial ecosystems are very largely reflected in these databases. Aquatic ecosystems are very, very poorly reflected. Plants, again, are reflected, but the impacts are very rarely noted down. In a country that has 23 official languages, 22 non-English languages, we have very, very little mechanism how to access information that is available in vernacular languages. And this book scores very highly on all these regards. There are aquatic plants. There are names that are given in vernacular languages for these invasive species. I think the main highlight of this book will be, I hope that this book is able to help researchers and practitioners strike a conversation with policymakers. And also kind of help inspire the young researchers of tomorrow to kind of take up this field, because this field is in its formative and incipient stages. Anything that you find is actually new information, at least in the Indian context. So I hope that this book, a very scientifically solid and a very attractive book, kind of helps build the future generation of invasion biologists in the country. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alok, for your generous comments and your insights and setting up the context very well. I would now like to invite our next speaker. A little about him. Tarsh is a researcher and conservationist with a body of action on inclusive models of conservation, be it human-elephant conflict to coexistence or community-based management of land tenure in the Nilgiris. He's also affiliated with the Coexistence Consortium and TDU. Over to you, Tarsh. It'll be really nice to know your views on the topic and given the kind of work that you do. Over to you. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. It's quite an honor to be invited to talk about this with all these great people having authored this book. And I'm personally very excited to look through it more because it provides a nice compendium of all the invasive species. People always joke about, I know nothing about any native plants, because I'm not a biologist by training, but I only know some of the major invasives here. So it's really nice to have all of this information about all the invasives in one place. So most of my work relevant to the webinar today is related to lantana, which I think everyone knows as a highly problematic weed. I won't say anything about how invasive it is and the problems it poses, but maybe a little more about what we've been doing about it, because that may be of interest to people. So the first thing, something that we talked about a little while ago, we heard about was the lack of information about invasives, which that was a huge problem for lantana as well. We didn't know the extent of the spread of lantana across the parks in South India. So around 2015, what we started doing was to use a very grounded approach of laying a 1 square kilometer grid all over the parks and walking around extensively through all the major parks in the NBR to figure out how much lantana there was, using a very simple qualitative scale, 0 being no plants, 1 being a few plants around you, 3 being more or less lantana, but you could move through, and 4 being dense lantana that you couldn't move through. And we collected over 10,000 points across Satyamangalam, Wayanad, Mudumalai, Bandipur. And we had made some very extensive maps of the spread of lantana. And the scale is huge. About 40% of the parks are taken over by lantana. And for us, the interesting thing about this methodology was that we designed it with the Forest Department field staff, largely indigenous people from these areas, who could then walk around and hopefully replicate this themselves every few years and continuously keep getting maps about how lantana is taking over and how it's spreading. So that's a really interesting bit of work to see how that's progressing and developing the tools to map lantana continuously. But more interesting than that, perhaps, what are we going to do about it? And this again starts with a paper we published in 2012. Um, that was reviewing the extent of lantana, and we found it was huge not just in India, it was huge everywhere in the world, Australia and Southern Africa. And forest departments have been trying to remove it for over 100 years. Intensive management plans started a long time ago. 1916 is the first eradication plan in the forests of Coorg and Benne, which is Mudumalai, right here where I work. So for 100 years, people have been trying to cut it and clear it, and it hasn't been working. So clearly, we need to change the approach. And that's when we started on this whole idea of getting local communities to use it. We didn't really start this. A3 are the pioneers in this. They were doing the lantana crafts, the center that was started in Hills a long time ago. But what we started doing is making these more high-value lantana elephant sculptures that are traveling around the world in very high-profile exhibitions. And that's worked really well. Furniture was all very small amounts of income. But the lantana elephants have been close to 3.5 crores of income over the last 5 years, and we have now 150 people working on it. But again, even though the elephants are doing really well, they don't really clear lantana from the forest. For crafts, people only harvest a few straight stems from every third plant or so when they find. So people keep asking how much lantana has been cleared, and the answer is not that much. So what we're doing now is trying to create a mechanism to pulverize the whole plant and take it out so that it can be used in the biomass industry. Make briquettes, for example, is the simplest use for the plants. So yeah, work along those lines are ongoing. I don't think I'll say much more. But I think this approach for invasives is pretty useful for Senna spectabilis as well. It's a timber, so it's a lot easier. You don't have to create value. There already is value. It's just that the policy space has to allow for it to be removed. So the irony, for example, is Kerala is spending crores on removing lantana, and Tamil Nadu is letting Tamil Nadu paper mills remove the senna. Sorry, not lantana. Remove senna and pulverize it and use it for paper. And they are paying the forest department for every ton of lantana they remove a conservation fee. So I think the key to living with invasive, so to speak. I don't think we can eradicate many of these. Lantana in particular, I think it's more how do you live with lantana, is to find a use for it so that communities start taking it out continuously. And over time, hopefully we find some balance or we're able to kind of bring down the spread a little bit. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tarsh, for sharing the ground realities and also the challenges with the work that you do. And more power to you and the communities you work with. We would now move to our last guest speaker for the day. So very humble to introduce T.A. Udayan. T.A. Udayan is currently serving as the director of the Advanced Institute for Wildlife Conservation in Chennai. With 33 years of experience in the Indian Forest Service, he has worked extensively in wildlife management and training assignments both at the national and international level. He has also contributed to his expertise to organizations such as Tamil Nadu Biodiversity Board and Tamil Nadu Pollution Control Board. Welcome to the launch, sir. I would appreciate if you could provide us some insights on managing invasive plant species from a government policy standpoint, also taking into account the pioneering efforts of Tamil Nadu Forest Department. Over to you, sir.
Yeah, thank you so much, Aditi, and thank you for this opportunity, inviting me as well as giving me an opportunity to share a few thoughts on this very important topic, the problem of invasives. First of all, my compliments to the authors, who I think many of them I know for long, Shankar Raman, Divya, Ankila, etc. Wonderful book, a very, very important book on a very important topic. Very well written, very well illustrated. And I'm so happy that it will be a very, very handy book, not just for the foresters or the other professionals, but even to the public as such, and expose them to the various invasive plants. Personally, it has been an eye-opener for myself, because a plant like Tridax, I was under the impression that it is a native plant, but it turns out to be an exotic or an invasive plant. So I think this book will be extremely useful in this era where invasives and climate change are twin challenges, especially for a forester or a wildlifer. Just to illustrate, we know that studies have been done just to show how just an electric pole or an telegraph pole and the wires, how they affect the bird diversity in an area, in a forest. The whole the diversity scene changes. So just imagine where we now have kilometers and kilometers of areas covered by species like prosopis, wattle, as well as lantana. I think the problem is extremely serious. The impact or the damage quite a bit has been already done. I think the important thing would be to, first of all, ensure that the areas that are still, I would say, not pristine, but at least not affected in a very big way, I think we need to protect those areas first so that the spread is checked. And I think the forest department all over the country is looking into this. Of course, we are at various stages. Coming to Tamil Nadu, I think we have moved ahead as compared to many other states. At least in the sense that we have come out with a very, very, I would say, a policy. I think many of you may be aware. It's called, the acronym is TN Piper, which stands for Tamil Nadu Policy on Invasive Species and Eco-Restoration. So this policy document is a very, I would say, an up-to-date document bringing with the latest concepts of invasive plant or invasive plant ecology, which has been incorporated in it. And it is not just looking at invasives from a political boundary point of view. It is looking at it from an ecological boundary point of view. I think that's a very important point in this particular policy that we have come out with. But I think all of us agree that it is just not the policy. The implementation part is extremely important, and that is not going to be small, nor is it going to be simple. But we have started it, and I've seen other states like Kerala also doing their bit as far as restoring habitats with the removal of exotics. And another point I would just like to finish off with is the point to be noted is in Tamil Nadu, at least, the courts have intervened, the judiciary has intervened in tackling these invasives. So that really shows that whether you like it or not, we are bound to do it. And sometimes they also dictate the decisions. So, but that clearly kind of shows that we have not been doing much from our point of view due to various constraints. So the courts have also intervened, but I think now the problem is well recognized. The funds have started trickling in, I would say. So we expect to make an impact. And I'm sure this kind of publication which they have come out with will go a very, very long way in making people aware, making even professionals aware as to the issues and looking at plants with a different lens. So I once again compliment the authors and the publishers for coming out with this very important book. Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you so much for your kind words, sir. And thank you for sharing the insights of how the state is approaching the matter and how they are still on somehow the right path, and more power to you. With this, we now move towards the much awaited official unveiling of the book. We would have loved to do this in person physically. Nevertheless, a little celebration is in order. We'll also be sharing the link to the book on the chat box in a few moments. So please download the book, and if you like it, please feel free to sort of give us a virtual applause on the Zoom through the icons. So now I present a little video to sort of officiate the launch and extend a big heartfelt shout out to everyone who's been involved.
Aditi, the video is not playing. Is that a bandwidth issue or?
Can you see your video playing? No?
No.
Okay, so I'll share my screen again. Can you see my screen?
We can see your screen and we can see the folder, but
can you see it playing?
No.
Okay. Can you try to play it through your?
Let me do that. Let me do that.
Sorry for the glitch, guys. Just give us a few moments. Meanwhile, please check out the book. on the chat box.
Aditi, could you stop sharing your screen? Then I'll share.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the music didn't play, but it was still visible. Thank you for that, Anando. So we have the link to download the book in the chat box. So the attendees, please feel free to share it in your circles, and you can also tweet or post on social media. Let me quickly show you where the book, you can find the book on our websites as well. Is my screen visible?
Again, I can't see the PDF. I'll try to share from my screen, Aditi, and this time it's
Okay.
this time it's
Okay.
not video,
You
but
can share. I can sort of
yes.
walk them through it. So if you go on the Biodiversity Collaborative website, so on the news and event part on the homepage itself, we have a link to download. And if you go on the NCF website, so on the homepage, under the blog section, you will find the book. So feel free to download it and spread the word. Thank you, Anando. With this, now we move on to the authors of the book, people who are behind the effort. And I would like to sort of start with Ankila, who's been sort of with us since day one of the effort. So Ankila, over to you. Share your part of the story of the effort. And yeah.
Thank you, Aditi. Am I audible? I can't seem to.
Yeah, you're audible.
Thanks. So yeah, first of all, I'd like to just say how enjoyable a journey it has been to work on this book with this wonderful group of co-authors and illustrators and designers. And moving on to a little bit about what the story that led up to this book. I think the previous speakers have set the stage very nicely for me to dive in and talk about this. Tarsh mentioned the wicked problem of trying to manage invasive species, and Mr. Udayan alluded to the need to how do you decide what are priority habitats in which to concentrate management, which species to manage. And as Alok mentioned, we have about 200 plus invasive plant species in India that we know of today, but there's very little information about them. So when we started to think about invasive plant management, we've the questions that struck us, which are obvious, are how do we manage, which species do we manage, and where do we concentrate our management efforts? Because trying to manage invasive species and restore native habitats is time consuming, and it takes tremendous amounts of resources. And as the late Rauf Ali used to joke, all our efforts seem to be concentrated on what he called the page 3 invasive plants. So lantana, Senna spectabilis, prosopis, now called Neltuma, and maybe a few more, Parthenium, for instance. But there are, almost 200 other plants for which we know very little, both who they are and where they are. So as a first step to try and address this, and knowing, given the vast size of this country and the number of invasive species there are, we knew there was no way that a small group of conservation and wildlife biologists could address this issue. So we reached out to citizen scientists through an effort that we called SPICE, Spotting Alien Invasive Species, on the India Biodiversity portal. And within a month of setting up SPICE and launching a campaign, we had almost 500 observations uploaded by interested citizen scientists. And we were extremely encouraged by this, and decided to then try and see if we could be a little bit more ambitious, because what SPICE did was it allowed us to record the presence or absence of invasive species, but it didn't allow us to try and also record how widespread these species distributions were, or how abundant these species were, which is also essential information if you're trying to then, if you're interested in trying to figure out which species should one be focusing our efforts on, or which habitats are priority habitats for management. So encouraged by the initial interest, we launched on a slightly more ambitious citizen science effort building on SPICE, which we call the Mapping Invasive Alien Plants, or MIAP initiative. And this was about 3 years ago, to see if we could try and, with the help of interested volunteers, record where species occur, but also how abundant they are, and what the extent of their distributions are. And as part of this MIAP, we collaborated with the Biodiversity Collaborative, and especially Ravi Jambhekar, to come up with a set of information cards on each of these invasive species that we were mapping. And Ravi did beautiful illustrations for these cards, which he will talk about in a little while, so I won't talk about those. We piloted the MIAP initiative in the Nilgiris. And the Nilgiris is a beautiful landscape, as a lot of you would know. It's been a magnet for people from all over the country and from different parts of the world, but people have come carrying their favorite plants with them, many of which are now invasive in the Nilgiris, which ironically also makes the Nilgiris a good place to pilot such an effort. And I'll hand it over to Anita next to talk about our initial efforts with MIAP in the Nilgiris. Thank you.
Yeah, before we move to Anita, I forgot to introduce you, Ankila. I know a lot of people who've joined us know you, but a little introduction would still be nice. So Ankila is an ecologist focusing on conservation, restoration, and sustainable resource use in human natural systems. Her work spans forest and woodland savannas of Bihar Hills in Karnataka, across the Nilgiris in Tamil Nadu, and in the Bunny grasslands of Kutch. And much of it has involved working with invasive alien species, especially Lantana and Prosopis julifera. She is an adjunct senior fellow at ATRI. Thank you for your words, Ankila. Now, before we move to Anita, a little about Anita for those who don't know her. Anita is the director at Keystone Foundation and leads the Biodiversity Conservation Program. Her work focuses on conservation, sustainable use of NTFP, and long-term population dynamics of harvested species. It also involves studying human-wildlife interaction, invasive plants, endangered trees, and exploring ways to harmonize conservation and development goals. Over to you, Anita.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. It's really lovely to see this day. We've been dreaming about this book, and it's really one of the, it's been one of those projects that has happened so quickly, and I want to congratulate the whole team that made it happen. It's been a wonderful experience. So thank you to all my co-authors, co-designers, all of us who put our efforts here, especially to Biodiversity Collaborative and NCF, for leading on this effort of bringing it to, to a publication. So thanks much. Yes, like Ankila said, one of the things as plant biologists, it's very easy to get people onboarded on a citizen science project when it has to do with wildlife or birds or ordinates or butterflies. There's a lot more action. But how do you get people interested in a plant? Because a plant stays where it is. And, you could always say, oh, I can come back and record this observation anytime, right? So one of our big things that I remember we talked a lot about, how do we get people interested in plants, gazing at plants? And like Ankila also pointed out, how do we go beyond just the naming or the photograph? How do we, get them to give us some comments or to record observations on abundance, on the habitat around it? So how do we start taking the citizen science questions beyond just inventory or, that sort of a level? So this was definitely something that we took on, and the Nilgiris was a contained space, yet a microcosm of invasion, microcosm of what could happen in possibly in the Western Ghats. I remember we zeroed in about 85 plants from the 200 or so that we had for the rest of the country. And we narrowed it through secondary literature. We said, okay, here's 85 plants. Let's focus our efforts on mapping this. It was with the collaborative effort of the Nilgiri Natural History Society, which then brought its membership together with local colleges, with local institutions, with citizen groups, that we were able to pull it off. It takes a great field team to do it. And I think Reshnu was very instrumental in running those programs with all the colleges. You could just tell Reshnu, hey, tomorrow morning, this college has given us a session. Can you be here? And he'll just take the night train and he'll be here. And we also have our colleague Shiny, Shiny, somebody, she talks about plants, she lights up like a Christmas tree. So that kind of passion was also important to sort of get people interested. And I would say that we've reached to about 500 to 600 people in the couple of months that we ran these initiatives. It took from training people in how to use the app, from going out there, going with them to different areas to map. The interest from the forest department was also something that, turned out to be a very good part of the exercise of mapping invasives in the Nilgiris. We had APWs, we had guards, foresters. I think we've managed to cover the whole the department in the Nilgiris. They were very supportive and willingly took up these workshops. And they continue to contribute data and upload sightings of plants that we've seen. So it's been very interesting. And I think I would say that the way we went, I really think that people can get interested in plants, and we can get citizens interested in mapping plants. And I know this book with these excellent illustrations is going to get more people interested in plants, and hopefully, reporting back on and being part of programs, because I think something that Alok referred to, that the scale of the problem is immense. We have definitely a lack of data and lack of information on it. And it has to be a much more concerted effort at many levels for us to get the information to act upon. But that's my 2-bit, and it's been great to be part of the process. Thank you, Aditi.
Thank you, Anita, also for sharing the field anecdotes. It was interesting. Now we would move to the next author speaker, T.R. Shankar Raman, also known as Sridhar. So a little about him. T.R. Shankar Raman is a wildlife scientist and author affiliated with Nature Conservation Foundation. He specializes in tropical forest ecology and conservation, particularly in the Western Ghats. Based at Valparai Research Station in the Annamalai Hills, he has authored Pillars of Life, Magnificent Trees of the Western Ghats, and has edited works like At the Feet of Living Things. Uh, Welcome, Sridhar, and it'll be very nice if you could walk us through the contents of the book and what significant it really holds in the lives of people. Over to you.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me clearly?
Yeah.
Okay. First of all, I'm very happy to be here with all of you. As Anita said, it's been a wonderful experience working with everyone to bring this book about. From NCF, Madhavan, Divya, and I have been working with them for a little over a year on trying to get it just right for this book. And so it's really nice to see it launched today. I also appreciate the comments made by Mr. Udayan, Tarsh, and Dr. Alok Bang, because they've made my job easier. They've really set the context as to why this is a very significant issue for conservation and what are the practical aspects of it, what are the policy implications of it. It is it's a wide-ranging issue that connects to a large section of society. The citizens, civil society groups, agriculture departments, forestry departments, horticulture, it's really cuts across all these groups. And very rightly, like they pointed out, that our attempts at understanding invasive alien species are at incipient stages in the country. We do know quite a bit about some species, but there are a lot of species about which we have barely begun to, even study them. So it is in that context that we felt that we need to come out with a book that at least gives an introduction to the problem posed by invasive alien species and flag some of the most significant ones, at least in the context of Peninsular India. So that's how this book came about, and it's a book that has descriptions of about 50 species, and we wanted to make sure that it covers all the major ones, but also some that perhaps have not yet been widely recognized as potential invasive. It also has species in different growth forms. So, for instance, there are trees that are known to be invasive. For instance, like Prosopis or Neltuma juliflora, or the wattles, which are quite well known. There are shrubs that are invasive, like Lantana, Harsh was talking about, and several others. But there are also many other herbaceous plants as well as climbers that are invasive. And so the thing that immediately struck us as we started working on this book was that although many of these species are very widespread, our knowledge of them and the details about them are actually still quite scarce. And so as a first step, we thought that putting this information out there in a form where a lot of people can begin to recognize these species, begin to recognize the concerns over invasive alien species, would help to generate that information going forward. So the book, that's the reason why we focused on this. And that's also the reason why the book is organized in a manner that it can be read by anybody. A lot of the information that if you went and looked for information on these species, you might find that it often becomes very technical, very detailed species, very detailed accounts, or technical information with a lot of jargon. And we wanted to strip all that out and make brief general accounts that basically anyone can pick up and read and get to know about the species and so on. So what we have in the book, and I really encourage all of you to just grab a copy and go through it. It's a 223-page book that introduces these species. In the case of each species, we have provided a brief description, and the description goes very well with the lovely illustrations made by Ravi Jambhekar, so that helps you to understand what the species looks like and begin to recognize it in your surroundings as the very first step to getting to know something about that plant. Following that, we have also included a little paragraph about their impacts. What are the known impacts of these species? Now, it is also true that for a lot of species, we don't really know their impacts because there have been very few studies. But what is known about them, maybe from other areas, we have tried to encapsulate briefly as a section on impacts. After this, there is a map that's provided. And the map gives you a global view of the species, where the species originated from, and the fact that it is here in India. But you will notice immediately that even within India, we don't really know very well what their distributions are, and that's the reason why, as Ankila and Anita were saying, there are a lot of efforts that need to be made, and involving citizens, involving the academic community and others to try and map these distributions better, so that we have a better understanding and handle on the species. But still, we have provided what information we could get at this stage about the overall global distribution of the species. Finally, there's a section on management. Again, this is a brief section which tries to address a few key ways in which people have tried to attempt managing that species in areas where it has turned invasive. This is not meant to be an authoritative sort of or scientific approach to a particular species, because a lot of it depends on the local and the regional context, and on knowing exactly what the impacts of that species are. Listing a species in this book does not mean that immediately we have to go and try and remove all these species from wherever they are found. It really doesn't mean that. But there are particular places where they may need careful attention. And like Mr. Udayan pointed out, there may be areas which are not invaded by these species, where these species can potentially invade, that we may need to safeguard. It could also be the case that some of these species play important roles. For instance, in our cities, some of the trees may already be there in our cities, and they may be playing a very different role in the city. And you may want to keep them there rather than remove them as well. So the listing of these species as invasive aliens is not meant to be used as a sort of a blanket measure. I think the idea of the book is to give you a sense of all the different places and roles that these places these invasive species are found, and the roles that they could be playing, and maybe move forward to a future where we can address it in a more nuanced and targeted way. So I'll also just end with a couple of points. One is the fact, again, Dr. Alok Bang mentioned this, that there is a lot of information about invasive species. It's still data deficient. We don't know a lot, and we hope that you will take a look at this book and engage with this issue and contribute your observations into the pool of knowledge that will allow us to know more and to handle these species. I don't think you will regret if you take an hour or two on this book. It is really well worth it. It's also beautifully designed by our colleague Janvi Rajan at NCF, and you should, I leave it to you to download the book, or pick up a copy for yourself and spend a couple of hours with it, and hopefully you will feel like we do, that it's a couple of hours well spent. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Sridhar. Also, thank you for soft launching the hard copy as well. We hadn't seen it yet. So I hope a lot of questions about the book were also answered in a way. Now, as much as we've talked about the interesting, rich content of the book, I think the book is also so much very about the beautiful art, as we've been constantly saying, and for which we owe our gratitude to Ravi Jambhekar. So before I invite Ravi to sort of talk about his experience with the painting, the illustration, and also using it as a tool for science communication, I would like to introduce him. Ravi Jambhekar is an urban biodiversity specialist at the Indian Institute for Human Settlements. He holds a PhD from the Center for Ecological Sciences. His research focused on butterfly populations in the Western Ghats, studying landscape features impacts. He's also a natural history painter, botanical artist who uses art and science to raise awareness about biodiversity. Over to you, Ravi.
Thanks, Aditi. Firstly, I would like to thank the Biodiversity Collaborative for such a great initiative and coming up with this idea of making a book on invasive species. So initially, when Ankila and Madhura approached me for making the illustrations, they had told me that we will make 2 or 3 species cards. Illustrating the impacts of invasive species and the plant. And I was on board for that. And then slowly it expanded to making illustrations for about 50 species. And I have made about 200 plus illustrations for this book and used like watercolor and pen style to bring out the characteristics of these plants. So yeah, it was a great experience, but it took a lot of patience and motivation to make these illustrations, because after a point it like I didn't know how many illustrations to make for each species. And the more and more I was making illustrations, I felt that maybe I can add a few more species or a few more plants or butterflies or bees that are being affected by these invasive species. But yes, so more than anything, I think it was like a lot of patience that was required to complete the project. And thank you everyone. Thank you Divya, Sridhar and Ankila, Aditi, Anita for giving me this opportunity, and Reshnu for making all those beautiful maps describing the spread of invasive species. Thank you.
Thank you, Ravi. And I also remember we used to constantly talk about that if you're going to make these illustrations so pretty, how will we resist people from planting these plants in future? So that was a constant joke that would run.
Yes.
So with that, we sort of close, the speaker part of the event, and I'll quickly go through the questions. So there's a question by Ankil, I'm guessing you're typing an answer for Arati. Yes, and there's another question which I think was Anita. Did you respond to a question by Gayatri?
To Gayatri, I did respond. I don't know if she's satisfied, but yes.
But it was an interesting question because I feel like a lot of people who are not aware of the invasive plant species, they do have this question. Would you sort of like to talk about this dilemma that people have?
Yeah. Several times, like for instance, in the book, we also classify coffee as an invasive species, so coffee robusta. And when I talked about this to some of the indigenous farmers, and they said, is it invasive in our farm or is it invasive in the forest? I said, it's invasive when it's in the forest. So it can also be invasive where it is. But I think the point is I don't know, but Ankila and Sridhar can also support or let me know if this is right. But a lot of introductions have happened through gardeners from little backyard gardens and, the idea of aesthetics. So to be also aware that what may not be an invasive today, there's a high chance that, under favorable conditions, can escape from your garden and become an invasive. So I think that's just a point that I'd like to make there. And even though it colonizes, it's probably costing the habitat of another native herb or a climber. And that's the kind of things that I think as gardeners, as people who love plants, we need to be aware of.
Yeah, thank you. Also, there was a question about current citizen science efforts in India. So, which Ravi Chellam, you've responded to it, but Madhavan or Reshnu, do you want to, since you've been involved in citizen science efforts, would you sort of give somebody an introduction who's just starting out on citizen science? of what are the platforms or how to sort of go about it. Reshnu, over to you. I'll give this question to you. Come on. You'll have to unmute yourself.
Yeah. All right. Sorry. The book had the work I have, or we all have put into the, or I have specifically put into for the book has come as a part of this a citizen science project which we have been doing, and the primary objective was for us was to definitely map the invasive alien plants distribution, and we wanted to create a model for that can be used maybe in the future for a whole country to map invasive plants. So there's a from our part also there's a citizen science initiative on mapping invasive plants is currently on the progress, and we call it mapping invasive alien plants, MIAP, and the link to that website I can provide you, and through the website we have created we have created a definitive guidelines of how each and everyone can who has a smartphone with them, which most people have right now, and can install a simple app ODK Collect and use that ODK Collect app to use that ODK Collect app and also find information about invasive plants from the books like these, The Guests Who Are Never Left, and also use those information, use those information cards which we have already provided in the app to give that give us a platform for all people to be part of a citizen science project, which we are also currently bringing it up. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So one question also which has come around is, so somebody's asking about the process of how you go about identifying and classifying these species as invasive. So, but I think if you read the book, you will get to know. But for a very quick response, Ankila, can you talk about how we use these classifications?
Yeah, I think that's a very good question, and I should emphasize that it's not necessarily easy how you classify invasive species, because invasion is a process. You know, a lot of species get introduced. Take ornamental plants, for instance, you know, which is the most common way that people get in that plants get introduced, and many of them remain garden ornamentals forever, but some might escape and into the wild, and in a few years be able to establish populations, and then a fraction of those might be able to, you know, be more successful and not just maintain these little populations in the wild, but become very widespread and start having impacts on native biodiversity or also on ecosystem services that people depend on from these ecosystems. So as Dr. Lokbang mentioned earlier, you know, you have introduced species and then you have invasive species, and what distinguishes them is the impacts that they might have. And generally we think of invasive species as those that have negative impacts, which could be on biodiversity, ecosystem services, human health and well-being. I hope that answers the question.
I think a lot of questions have been answered by the authors. There's one question which is about the Mexican sunflower. Nikhil is asking, they are growing fast and okay, so I'll read out the question. I just looked through the book. Mexican sunflower or subabul are used as fast-growing mulch and green manure since they're hardy and grow fast with good management. They are kept under control. While some are harmful to the ecosystems, if they aren't causing any harms, are they to be reduced or controlled? Any author would like to take up that question?
I
Anita,
can say a
Sridhar.
little about it, maybe. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know much about Subabul myself, I'm afraid, but like a more philosophical take on this, I think, is something that Sridhar also touched on. Another kind of very generic, almost philosophical description of an invasive is a plant out of place, right? So it's all quite context specific. Like Sridhar said, like coffee may be very legitimate in somebody's farm, it may be invasive in a forest. And I think every species has to be judged based on the place and the time. So even lantana, for example, everybody goes on about how you shouldn't keep lantana in your gardens. But for me, the yellow and the more colorful ornamental lantanas, one, they don't seed, so they only propagate vegetatively. And they're a very good plant in a city where there's water scarcity. They don't need much watering. They're very hardy. They don't need any, they're not attacked by any pests. So I don't see them as a huge problem if they are in somebody's city garden, really, in outside, not close to forest areas. And anyway, there's so much lantana in the forest that it's never going to affect the cities. So I think a similar approach with Subabul would also be really important. It depends on the context where it is, and if it's managed effectively and useful to local communities, it definitely need not kind of be controlled or eradicated in that space. This whole idea of eradication and kind of dealing with it on a war footing and all of these terminologies, I think, are not that helpful in actually managing these invasive species where they are having a negative impact. Thank you.
Yeah, and just if I could just add a comment, like I would, for us to read the book, The Botany of Desire, and that it's this desire to own a plant, to have this flowering plant, or to take this fruit that tastes very good in one landscape and plant it, that's where the problem starts. And so when we say that we could control it, how many generations are you going to be able to control it? So, which is why probably safer not to move them around too much. And because I think somebody's going to come and eye that plant and say, can I take a few seeds and start it somewhere else, right?
Yeah. Thank you for that elaborate response and for the book suggestion as well. I think most of the questions have been answered, and I think if anything is unanswered, we can sort of send the questions across and send you the responses to our guests. Yeah, with this, I think we come to a close. Thank you so much. I've had a lovely time working with each one of you on this, and I think it's going to be an ongoing campaign since we should not stop talking about the guests who never left. So thank you everyone for joining in, the speakers, the authors, and everyone behind the effort. Yeah, a lot of gratitude to everyone. With this, we call it a close. Thank you so much. Take care. Happy Diwali.
Thank you. Thank you very
Bye.
much.
Thank you, and the
Thank
same
you.
to you.
Yeah. Bye bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Thank you.